So you might be wondering, why another psychic podcast? Don't we already have thousands of books, TV shows, movies, YouTube videos, TikToks, and courses about this stuff? Yes, we certainly do. Oh, yes, we do. And that's exactly why I'm adding my 2 cents. Because so much of what's out there is what I like to call psychic tap dancing. What do I mean by psychic tap dancing? Well, it's when the same old clichés, myths, and half-truths get recycled again and again, dressed up and repackaged with different bells and whistles, and presented as the ultimate truth about psychic phenomena. Ain't nobody got time for that. Welcome to the very first episode of The Sensible Psychic, the podcast edition. I'm your host, Anthon St. Martin, psychic medium and destiny coach. I was born with an unusual perceptual ability, and for most of my life, I tried to make sense of it. You see, this podcast isn't just another show about psychic stuff. For me, it's personal. It's the result of a lifelong quest to find sensible, reliable information to understand my own psychic ability and make sense of the supernatural experiences I've had since childhood. I inherited this unusual ability from my paternal grandmother. It wasn't exactly a family secret that she was a psychic medium, though it was rarely discussed. In a future episode, I'll share some of the family stories I was told about her being a tough-as-nails ghost buster in the small town community where she lived, but that's for another time. Still, having a psychic grandma didn't make my own childhood any easier. She passed away before I was born, so apart from the letter she wrote to me, I did not have her support in this world. More about that later also. So instead, I was left to my own devices and had to navigate ignorance, fear, and growing up in a conservative society that had no room for a weird kid who could see, hear, feel, and know things nobody else did. For years, I rejected my psychic heritage. As a kid, I was afraid. As a teenager, I didn't want to be ridiculed. Later, I studied psychology at university hoping for answers, only to discover that academia also had no place for people like me, who saw visions and heard voices. Apart from psychology and the social sciences, parapsychology has been helpful in many ways in later years, though at the peak of my search for answers in the early days, it also felt restrictive and confusing. At times, it raised more questions for me than it solved, particularly with the old school terminology, concepts, and methods I couldn't relate to. For example, I struggled to see how someone's precognitive ability could be meaningfully tested with a deck of Xena cards. I also couldn't understand why the field only recognized 3 categories of psychic phenomena: telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition, when any practicing psychic or medium knows there is so much more complexity and nuance to psychic perception than only that. Just ask around. So, while parapsychology was not always helpful in my early search, I must also acknowledge that without the last 100 years of its research, many of the answers I rely on today would still be missing. Hats off to those scientists who pursued this work against all odds. We'll definitely return to this topic in an upcoming episode. When the internet finally opened some new doors to sources of information that I never had access to before, I turned to the fast-growing online psychic community with curiosity and new hope. But what I found was mostly contradictions. Recycled clichés and confusing superstitions, and so many myths and misconceptions. Nothing matched my real-world experiences. Honestly, it left me even more confused and frustrated. I had questions, so many questions, and the more I studied and learned, the less sense it all made. Meanwhile, the rest of the world seemed to be convinced that psychic phenomena just don't exist, and that anyone who claims otherwise must be a charlatan, intellectually challenged, or simply delusional. But that did not make any difference in my life, because I was still experiencing those so-called imaginary delusions. And this is why I made psychic research a personal priority. I was determined to cut through the myths, untangle the confusion, and develop a more accurate understanding of the true nature of psychic phenomena. Over the years, through personal research and professional practice, that mission has become a substantial part of my life's work. And now, this podcast is part of sharing that work with you. So you might be wondering, why another psychic podcast? Don't we already have thousands of books, TV shows, movies, YouTube videos, TikToks, and courses about this stuff? Yes, we certainly do. Oh, yes, we do. And that's exactly why I'm adding my 2 cents. Because so much of what's out there is what I like to call psychic tap dancing. What do I mean by psychic tap dancing? Well, it's when the same old clichés, myths, and half-truths get recycled again and again, dressed up and repackaged with different bells and whistles, and presented as the ultimate truth about psychic phenomena. Pick up a psychic book, watch a documentary, or sign up for a course, and you are very likely to find the same random collection of New Age practices, esoteric pursuits, spiritual beliefs, and divination techniques, palmistry, astrology, tarot cards, angels, totems, chakras, even spoon bending and tea leaves, all mashed up and labeled psychic. Now, look, I am just as keen on esoteric teachings and mystical pursuits as the next person. Don't get me wrong. Contrary to what is sometimes assumed, I am not at all opposed to these traditions and techniques, nor am I dismissive of them. In fact, I have studied and experimented with most of them and continue to do so. That said, it's important to draw a clear distinction between actual psychic phenomena and various divination practices and spiritual pursuits, because they are not the same thing. In my work with awakening psychics and mediums, helping them develop their perceptual abilities and channeling skills, it is not helpful to entangle them in a web of divination tools and belief systems. After all, whose angel, spirit guide, or tarot deck is considered better or more psychic than another's? This is why in my work with clients, I often use irreverent terms like fairy godmother or superhero or wingman when referring to what others might call a guardian angel or spirit guide. It's not meant to be disrespectful or mocking, but rather to dispel the myth that we all perceive and experience these phenomena the same way, and to untangle some of the convoluted ideas people often attach to these labels. It always reminds me of a client who once broke down in tears, utterly inconsolable with disappointment, shame, and frustration. She had been participating for several months In a psychic mediumship development program where the teacher insisted that by a certain point in the course, every student should be able to identify their main spirit guide and know that guide's name. Around her, everyone was calling their spirit guides by their names, except for my client, who had no such experience yet, while in fact she is psychically very gifted. To understand your own psychic experiences, or to validate the reality of psychic phenomena, it should never be a requirement that you know the name of a spirit guide or that you conform to someone else's belief system, process, or technique. That is what labels do. They put people into boxes, weighing down the actual phenomenon with unnecessary complications and distractions that do little to advance real understanding. This is why I often say, I am all for angels and spirit guides when introduced in the right context, at the right time, for the right reasons. But they should not be the starting point. Matters of personal belief, spiritual outlook, and preferred practice have their place, but they are not the phenomenon itself. My view is simple. If you're going to label something, the label should make sense. It should accurately reflect the actual phenomenon being described, not just echo a belief system, a technique learned from someone else, or something you once read that doesn't match the reality of the experience. The fact of the matter is this: whether or not you believe in spirit guides, aura reading, crystal energy healing, ascended masters, star beings, or twin flames, and whether or not these concepts or beliefs have anything to do with psychic phenomena, is not the point. The point is that there are cultures in the world where the very idea of an angel or a spirit guide simply does not exist. Yet people in those same cultures still recognize psychic perception and mystical experience. Now, don't get me wrong. Most of the esoteric practices and spiritual beliefs people commonly associate with psychics are fascinating, useful, and meaningful in their own right. But here's the truth. They are not psychic phenomena or psychic abilities. They're methods, tools, and traditions. Useful to those who resonate with it? Yes. Traditionally related to or extensions of psychic work? Yes. But they're not the innate perceptual ability that true psychics and mediums are born with. They also do not explain or clarify many of the psychic experiences ordinary people all over the world have every day. You will be surprised to know how many, despite what mainstream skepticism may have you believe. But more about that later in another episode. In popular culture, many of these phenomena and concepts are also misunderstood and misrepresented. Clairvoyance techniques like psychometry or remote viewing, for example, are often described as psychic abilities, when in fact they are simply a reading method or channeling technique. And why do we have 9 names, at last count, for psychic smelling, one of the rarest types of psychic perception, but only one label for 3 of the most important and most common psychic impressions? Yes, you heard right. Psychic smelling, or clairolfaction, is one of the rarest forms of psychic perception. Very few psychics and mediums experience it, yet we keep inventing more new labels for it. Meanwhile, the 3 most common forms of psychic perception, namely intuition, emotion, and sensation, all get shoved together into just one word: clairsentience. And why? Most of all, why? Why is the amazing everyday little miracles of psychic perception and mediumship routinely dismissed as simple intuition, that just needs to be practiced a little bit? Well, I can think of several reasons for this popular trend, which for me is probably my top pet peeve, but we will have to leave it there for now. And what is the result of all this fluff and mayhem? A lot of recycled influencer noise, a lot of mumbo-jumbo, and constant tap dancing ourselves into a psychic corner. And to make things even worse, it further fuels skepticism and ridicule. The muggles look at all this tap dancing that we do to make sense of it all, to try and justify our experiences, and to somehow be relevant or be taken more seriously, including the clichés, the fortune-telling theatrics, the sometimes outlandish claims. And the muggles conclude, psychics are crazy, psychics are frauds, or worse, psychics are wackadoodle clowns. But here's the thing, they got it wrong. There are actual psychics and mediums in the world, and we don't wear tinfoil hats or watch Netflix in our crystal balls. We also don't thrive on hocus pocus and medieval folklore. We simply live with a unique perceptual ability or capacity, as natural to us as painting or drawing is to a fine artist, or physical performance is to an Olympic athlete. And like talented artists and gifted athletes, many of us feel compelled to share our unusual ability to perceive, to be of service, to guide, to heal, to forewarn, to make sense of this life and what lies beyond. There have been people like us for millennia. People with a heightened perceptual ability have existed in every culture, tribe, and tradition throughout human history. Mystics, seers, oracles, and prophets served as vital links between humanity and the divine, between the physical and the metaphysical, acting as conduits through which insight, healing, and wisdom could be embodied. You see, this is what really matters to me. In my research, in my writing and teaching, in my channeling work with my clients, and now also in this podcast, I strive to break through the stereotypes, move past the misconstrued labels and the recycled myths and woo-woo, to get to the core truths and bare essentials of real psychic phenomena. So that is what the Sensible Psychic podcast is about. Getting to the heart of the actual phenomena and exploring clearer, more meaningful terminology for talking about them, without all the bells and whistles. Ain't nobody got time for that. This podcast is my humble contribution to try and turn at least some of the manic tap dancing into an on-point, majestic psychic ballet executed with surgical precision. My aim is to strip away the worst clichés, untangle many of the misconceptions, and offer you information and insight that is sensible, meaningful, and authentic. Each episode dives into a fascinating psychic or supernatural related concept, from clairvoyant reality and transliminality to phenomena like twin telepathy, second sight, shared death experiences, and why it is not true that you never see the news headline psychic wins the lottery. Because guess what? We actually do. So this is what you can expect from this podcast, straight talk about psychic and supernatural phenomena. Without the glitter, gimmicks, the mumbo-jumbo, and all the tap dancing that makes your head spin. Thank you for joining me for the first episode of the Sensible Psychic podcast. If you enjoyed this and want more, hit subscribe, share it with a friend, and stay tuned for the next episode where we'll continue cutting through the noise of another psychic tap dancing routine. Until then, stay sensible, stay centered, and stay proudly psychic.